So now I'm just going to talk you through the marking criteria for Part A, the digital narrative, and then I'm going to go back and explain Part B. So if you have a look at the top of the marking criteria, you will see that it has the extension part, and this is only relevant for people who are choosing option 3 and are attempting the extension one. So for this extension outcome, you may or may not achieve them depending on what you create. So the first one says composes a highly effective digital narrative which uses interactivity to engage the responder. The second one says demonstrates a highly effective ability to use a range of multimodal techniques to create atmosphere. So you can see that those two things, interactivity and how well you use it, and atmosphere and how well you've created it, are linked back with the outline for that part. Okay, so if you're doing option 3, those outcomes link directly to what was on your explanation. For everybody, though, regardless of which option you choose, you're going to receive a mark out of 25. You can see there that on the right-hand side, the bands are describing where the marks sit. So if you get 21 to 25, you're sitting in an A range. You get 16 to 20, it's a B. 11 to 15 is a C. 6 to 10 is a D. And 1 to 5 is an E. So regardless of which band, we are looking for 3 things in your digital narrative. So the first one is about the way you write your story and the narrative that you create, the story that you are actually telling. So you can see there in the A range it says composes an effective digital narrative that outlines an event from the chosen stimulus using the narrative structure. So we're looking for a story that uses the structure that we've been learning in class very well to tell us this story about Alice. If it's effective, you'll be hitting that range. In a B range, it says composes a competent digital narrative that outlines an event from the chosen stimulus. In the C range, it says composes a sound digital narrative that outlines an event from the chosen stimulus using the narrative structure, and so on. So depending on how well you tell the story using the narrative structure, which is orientation, complication, series of events, resolution, depending on how well you've done that, that's where that first criteria will be ticked. The second criteria and the second thing we're looking for in your story is how well you have used the multimodal techniques or the multimodal features, or in other words, the modes of communication to convey your story. So how well have you used the digital elements to put together and tell us your story? So in the A range, it says demonstrates an effective ability to use at least 3 multimodal techniques to convey their story. In the B range, it says demonstrates a competent ability to use at least 3 multimodal techniques to convey their story. In the C, a sound ability to use at least 2 multimodal techniques. And in the D range, it would be a limited ability. Okay, so the modes, again, just for those of us who might need a recap, will be things like the linguistic mode, so words and text and spoken and written words. There's the visual mode, which would be things like images, color, photographs, videos. All of those things fall into the visual. We have the audio mode, which would be the sound. Okay, so it could be music, it could be sound effects, things like that. We have the gestural mode, which has to do with how we use our bodies to use gestures or expressions to communicate. And the last one is the spatial mode, which has to do with things like layout and how you put it all together on the page. So those modes are the second thing we're looking for. So we're looking for the story itself, the multimodal features or the digital technology side. And the last thing, the third thing in the marking criteria is your ability to communicate and organize. So we're looking for how well have you put your story together? Does the text, does the story itself, what's actually happening, match with the images, with the videos, with all of the technological side? Do they actually match? Do they work together? Do they complement one another? So does your story add to what's on the screen visually, and vice versa? Does what's visually seen or heard contribute to telling the story? Okay, so if it's cohesive, it means they're all working really well together. If it's original, then it's going to be something that you've created yourself and it's a fresh idea. And if it's engaging, it means that it's going to be something interesting for us as the readers, okay? And remember, you have a specific audience, which is teenagers. So you need to think about how would you engage a teenage audience. So in an A range, if you're hitting that criteria, it says you display effective communication and organizational skills in a cohesive, original, and engaging story appropriate to the audience, the teenagers, and your purpose, which is telling the story. In a B range, you're using competent skills. In a C range, you're using sound skills, okay? And so on. Now, let's go back and look at part B. So part B, the second part, is a written reflection, and this is worth 15 marks. So for this part, you will be required to answer a series of short answer questions about your digital narrative. To answer these questions, you will need to. So you will need to prepare to do these things. 1, outline your narrative's audience and purpose. So you need to know, firstly, your story, and then who it was aimed at and why. Why did you tell that story the way you did? The second thing is you need to be able to identify the multimodal techniques and specific examples you have used in your digital narrative. So that may be things like, I used a sound effect, and the specific example of the sound effect I used was the sound of a bell ringing. You need to have an idea before you go into class on the 11th of September which ones you've used in your story. Number 3, you need to explain how these techniques have helped you to create an effective multimodal text. So you need to think about, firstly, what are all the features? But then, secondly, how have those features helped me, you, to create a story, and an effective story, one that is engaging? You will also need to be ready to use the teal paragraph structure in your answers, okay? So you'll have a series of questions that you're not sure of until the day, but they will be about those things. So if you can tell us the audience and purpose of your text, if you can tell us which multimodal techniques you have used with specific examples, and you can explain how they helped to create your text, then you will be prepared for those short answer questions. Now, the short answer questions may be varying in length. So you may have some 1 mark questions which require very short answers. You may have some 3 or 4 mark questions which require a little bit more writing, and you may have one that requires you to write a whole paragraph, okay? So your teacher will help you prepare for this in class. You will be marked in this section on how well you demonstrate your knowledge of multimodal techniques, so all the things that we've been learning in class and will continue to learn as we study Inanimate Alice. You'll be marked on how well you explain the multimodal choices you made in your text and support these with relevant examples from your text. And we'll also be looking at how well you write, so considering things like your choice of language, your spelling, your punctuation, your grammar, and how well you use the teal structure. So all of those things will be taken into consideration as we mark your short answer reflection.